Good evening, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to our board meeting, September 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. I would like us now to sing O Canada.
Épopée
des plus brillantes exploits.
God keep our land.
Glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for
Thank you, students. That was completely amazing. I look forward to the day when we can actually meet in the boardroom and you can join us there. That would be awesome. So I look forward to that. Moving on, you have an agenda in front of you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. We look at the agenda and I would like somebody to approve that agenda. Motion to approve by, if you could just raise your hand from the reactions. I can see Trustee Thatcher, seconded by Trustee Edwards. All those in favor? Thank you kindly. Agenda is approved. We have 4 sets of minutes in front of us. I need a motion to receive the approved minutes from May 17th. And I need a motion to approve the draft minutes of June 21st, June 22nd, and September the 7th. Motion put forward by Trustee Templeton, seconded by Trustee Barnes. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on, do we have any community presentations? I see.
Madam Chair.
Thank you kindly. Then I'm going to go to Director Marsh and ask her to present any ministry memorandums and information update. Thank you, Director Marsh.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair Morton, happy to provide trustees with an update in terms of some school operations as well as ministry memorandums. As you're aware, the ministry did direct all district school boards in Ontario to implement a mandatory vaccination declaration for staff, trustees, transportation providers, and regular and required visitors to board sites. So days before school began, we did receive the final specific directions in terms of the protocol we needed to implement. And I wanted to draw trustees' attention to the fact that at this stage, 1 week after launching the process, we have approximately 11% of our staff yet to declare. We are following up individually, and note that most of those staff are actually on our occasional list, and we are confirming with them whether or not they plan to continue to be on occasional lists. Sometimes those lists do become outdated. Of note, of staff who have declared, 92% of them are fully vaccinated at this stage. And for staff who are not fully vaccinated, the ministry direction, which we have implemented, is that they need to complete 2 rapid COVID tests per week, and we are providing those tests for them. The information is available on our public website and will be updated as we address the 11% who have yet to declare. I'd also like to alert trustees that there was a question from one of the trustees earlier in terms of EQAO memorandums, and we have received from the Ministry of Education updates in terms of EQAO for this year. They will begin again for grades 3 and 6 for reading and writing and mathematics, and the grade 9 mathematics assessment as well. They're only available to those students who are studying in person and not eligible for those students who are in the virtual school. You do have to be in person to physically write the EQAO assessment. We, of course, welcome the independent data, but do note that with a new curriculum, and as well, they are new assessments intended to be a bit more flexible and longer windows in terms of the administration, that the data that we obtain through the assessments this year that we will get next year will be a new baseline for the district, because it can't be compared to previous curriculum or different assessments that were previously administered. The whole equating system has changed for this new assessment model. I also wanted to note that for the OSSLT, so that's the Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test, last year we had advocated strongly that requirement for graduation, passing that test, that it be waived for the current grade 12 students that are graduating this year and for the current grade 11 students who will graduate next year. The reason for us asking for the condition for graduation to be waived was that we had indicated to the ministry that normally it is written in grade 10. And for those students who experience any difficulty with meeting the requirement, we can do remedial in terms of grade 11, in terms of ensuring that their literacy standard is to a graduation requirement, either through a course or in having them attempt the assessment again. By moving it on so that it's only open now to the students who are graduating next year, it could impact their grade 12 choices. And that's a year we often like to encourage apprenticeships and co-op placements. And so we had asked for them to consider not implementing it for this year's grade 11s. The ministry direction to school boards this month has been that we need to go ahead with the OSSLT. Part of the problematic part of it as well is that the requirement is that students be in person to write the assessment, which creates a huge challenge for those students who are studying virtually for a myriad of reasons. So we are concerned about the equity of that decision in terms of the ministry's direction to us. We are working closely with home schools, and we will provide opportunities for students who are in the virtual school to have access to that assessment this year. While we're on the topic of assessments, I did also want to indicate to you, we have received a ministry memo this month in terms of the math proficiency test. Trustees may recall that we indicated to you our concern last year with the plan to move forward with this credentialing for teachers, that before they are qualified to teach in Ontario, they must pass the math proficiency test. And we flagged specifically with a shortage of teachers, such as in French, who will never teach mathematics, that we felt that this credentialing was problematic for us. The ministry memo has indicated that they're delaying the implementation of it. It had been for August 31st. All new teachers were supposed to have passed it, and they're delaying it now to December 31st to provide a longer window for access to this new assessment. It should also be noted that it is currently under judicial review. In terms of whether or not the ministry is allowed to move forward with this, that judicial review was brought forward by a coalition of Ontario's teacher candidates. In terms of teaching staff and where we're at with the hiring that we needed to do, we are once again this year responding to an overprojection in terms of those who've come forward to register with Durham District School Board. We're very pleased to be welcoming new students and happy to see the district grow. However, when registrations do come in late, it does have an impact on staffing in terms of hiring. So I reported last time we had approximately 400 teachers to hire. As you know, with the hiring process, that does create sometimes some instability at the very beginning of the year. We put an occasional teacher into the classroom when we know that we are creating classrooms to meet growing enrollment. And then because of the collective agreement, we want to be respectful of the expectations. We then have to identify based on seniority who is eligible for that position and then move forward from there through an interview process. Unfortunately, what that does mean from a student perspective is that there can be rotation of different educators in the classroom as we work our way through this process. So understand that it can feel very frustrating in terms of the changes, but we do hope that as we stabilize in terms of understanding what our enrollment is, that we will be in better shape as we get people in place for the year. So we have made great progress, and I do want to thank certainly all staff for their strident work in terms of trying to act quickly so that we did have teachers for students at the beginning of school. And also want to thank families and students for their patience. We know that can be a bit disjointed for them. I also want to let you know that we have been addressing class sizes. Normally, we would wait until the end of September to do a September reorg, but because of the pandemic, we made a commitment that we would be looking at larger classes and addressing larger classes earlier on. So at this stage, we have done a bit of a shuffle in terms of where enrollment was projected but didn't necessarily materialize. We did collapse some classes to bring them together, understanding though that the goal was to keep classes relatively small. And then we have added where we had the largest classes. We've also added additional ECEs into the system, which represents new hires and new permanent jobs for Durham District School Board. I think it's been an incredibly challenging beginning to the new year in terms of shifts in enrollment and trying to be as responsive as possible in a quick manner in terms of that. But certainly a number of vacancies for us to fill. If you can imagine hiring 400 new staff within a couple of weeks. And then, of course, ensuring that we are paying close attention to pandemic management. So certainly appreciate the efforts of everyone involved in having the return to school feel as welcoming as possible for students and really focusing on creating positive relationships. I know that last year when I was in schools at this time, students were very quiet as they adapted to being back in school. And this year, the good news is that students are are speaking up and not at all impacted, it seems, in terms of adjustment to wearing the masks in their classes. They're very vocal, and it feels a lot more like it did pre-pandemic in terms of students' comfort in contributing to the classes that they're in. So that concludes my update as well as the memorandum update. Happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Questions for Director Marsh? If you had a question, you could just raise your hand from reactions. I'm seeing Trustee Forbes with a hand up.
Thank
Darlene?
you. Thank you, Chair Morton. I guess I'm just wondering, I know that I know it's been challenging with the kind of and the role of enrollment ebbs and flows, and we're fortunate to welcome new students to the system. I was just wondering, in terms of when we have gaps or when we're rotating through staff, is that communicated back kind of proactively to families that this is kind of like a transition period that we're going through? I'm just wondering how we're handling communication.
Thank you very much. Associate Director Markowski, I may ask you please to address how principals are managing the changes within their schools.
Thank you, Director Marsh, and through you, Chair and Trustee Forbes. So as you mentioned, we do provide school principals with templates that they can use in terms of communicating out when there's a need for reorganization in September. That also being said, many principals have their own communication letters that they've crafted. They can reach out to their superintendent or system lead as needed, but to answer your question, there is communication that's shared to the family, usually in advance, and that way they're prepared for the transition.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I see no other hands, but I definitely have a comment or two. Firstly, I need to say thank you for addressing class sizes earlier than usual. And I realize that staff have faced many challenges and have put forth very strong efforts. So I really thank you for doing that. I also love to hear the fact that our students are very vocal. They are speaking up. That warms my heart. I think all of our students, all of our teachers are very pleased to be back in the classroom. We are thankful. Further comments? I see no hands up. Thank you kindly. We will move on to public question period. And I think we have Dylan who is ready to ask his question. Dylan, are you there?
Good evening, everybody. I'm up with me.
Thank you, Dylan. So you have one question for us tonight, Dylan?
I do tonight, actually. My first question tonight is, with COVID-19 cases going up in the community and starting to see cases in the schools, I'm wondering, what does a Ddsb rollback look like? And if we have to return to the models that we had last school year in the 2021 school year, the 2020-2021 year, I meant.
I think we would go to Director Marsh then for an answer.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I'm going to ask Associate Director Markowski to talk about the work that schools are doing with his assistance.
Thank you. And Director Marsh, if I may, Dylan, can you just repeat to me the nature of your question? I think I'm misunderstanding in terms of what you're referring to here.
With COVID-19 cases going up in the community and starting to see cases in the schools, I'm wondering, what does a Ddsb rollback look like? And if we have to return to the models that we had last school year in the 2020-2021 school year.
So thank you, Dylan. And I guess I'll start off by just sharing. So we do have case and contact management protocols in place. We work very closely with our public health unit, the Durham Region Health Department. When there are cases, we will make sure that we follow the necessary protocols. In relation to the impact on schools, it looks and feels very different depending on the cases, and sort of this year, for example, a bit different than last year. We also have confirmation of vaccination status versus not vaccinated and how that impacts the work that we do. But in relation, and I guess I'm hoping I'm understanding you right, if you are referring to the need to have like virtual schooling, right now with grades 7 and up, because those at age 12 and up have access to vaccination, once we get clearance from DRHD, those students return back to in-person schooling. For grade 6 and under, the teacher will switch to virtual schooling to support during that time. And if I'm missing the nature of your question, I apologize. I'd be happy to provide further information if there's more that you're looking for.
Well, my supplementary question would be is that last school year, the models were different, especially at secondary, where they were going from 10 to 12:30 and then virtual in the afternoon. Then I'm wondering for all smaller class placements, if the school day, last school year they were earlier, and this year they go from 10 to 4. I'm wondering if we were to roll back, would the day move earlier for small class placements?
Thank you for that supplemental question, Dylan.
So through you, Chair, and Dylan, thank you for bringing up that question. As you mentioned, last year there were different schedules in terms of students in the small class placements that you're describing. We have this year aligned all of the schedules in our secondary schools, so there isn't two different schedules that are taking place. We'll continue to monitor the situation. I mean, we don't have any intent on differentiating those schedules. That all being said, unless additional guidance comes forward from the Ministry or Public Health Unit, we are going to be working with the 10 to 4 schedule this year. We realize that that has posed some challenges for families, and we are working with DSTS, our Transportation Services Department, to hopefully look at moving that time into next school year or as additional information becomes available.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Dylan. I'm thinking that we have a second questioner, and that person would be Tracy. Tracy, are you there? We are waiting for Tracy to join us.
Tracy is there, Carolyn.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, it took me a moment to come over here.
Hi, Tracy. Welcome. You have a question?
Yes, I do. And actually, everything I've been listening to for the last 10 minutes is direct relating to my question. But I have written it down so that I can be as clear and concise as possible and give a little context for my personal, my personal question here. So my daughter has been attending David Bouchard Public School in the French Immersion program for the past 5 years. She's just started grade 6. For the past 2 years, though, grade 4 and grade 5, her class has not had consistent teachers. They have had multiple different supply teachers in both grades 4 and then again last year in grade 5. This constant coming and going of teachers has caused great inconsistency and instability for my daughter and the entire class, which has resulted in very detrimental effects, with lack of learning, comprehension, and the ability to meet the requirements of the grade level. With this constant rotation of supply teachers, the curriculum is continuously being interrupted and is disrupting the learning of these children. Not just the educational learning itself, but they're missing out on the security and the relationship building with their teacher that goes hand in hand with feeling supported, comforted, and emotionally safe in the classroom environment. My daughter never seems to know who she's going to get when she shows up to school in the morning in her French immersion class, which this year is the morning. My daughter has now started grade 6, and there is still no consistent teacher for her morning French immersion class. I didn't find this out until the day before her class when I logged into her classroom to find out the name of her teacher, and it said her teacher was number 5. I immediately knew and intuitively, instinctively that there was no teacher because I'd been experiencing this for 2 years prior. So this is obviously a very big problem, as I've been listening to. And there still does not seem to be an immediate solution. So my question is I'm asking the Durham District School Board what they are doing right now at the start of this school year to help support these children in this grade 6 class, French immersion, who are already behind 2 years. What actions for stability are being taken immediately to help these kids now before they get even further behind? And I do understand everything that you've all just said, but the children, they're 10 and 11 years old. They need the stability. So what's going on behind the scenes, I understand all of the challenges, but I am very concerned for all the kids in this class. It seems to be this one class that's consistently being affected. What is the Durham District School Board doing for them right now while you're doing all the other things behind the scenes? Who is helping the 10 and 11-year-olds that are being directly affected by this? That is essentially my question.
Thank you, Tracy, for that question. I'm going to turn to Superintendent Heather Mundy to provide an answer to you.
Thanks,
Superintendent
Tracy, and through you, Chair Morton. Truly appreciate your concerns, and we do know the importance of having consistency in the classrooms for students, especially through their career. In terms of immediate, we know that, supply teachers, as we've said at the beginning, and the last 2 years have probably been a little more unique than previous with the pandemic and the just all the pieces that connect with that. We do have a French facilitator who works closely with schools where we have supply teachers in place to help build some consistency in the programming in the classroom. The other thing that I think is important that Director Marsh mentioned is for this current school year, we're currently reviewing student enrollment. And sometimes we wait till later in the month, but we've been working on it right now. And through that process, we're looking at reorganization of classes. And sometimes that involves removing classes from schools as well as adding classes. And through that process, we are identifying that some opportunities where we have French classes that we may be adjusting that may help provide some of those French teachers to support some of the vacancies that we currently have in the system. So we are working diligently on that and hope to have a few things in place over the next week or so. I mean, in addition, with the big picture, French teacher recruitment and retention continues to be a focus and something that across the province, right? So it's not unique to Durham District School Board. We did pool hiring early last year so that we could reach out to new candidates, new teacher candidates, and hired, 25, which based on our previous information was a good number to start with. So we'll continue to review that. We're attending virtual career fairs to recruit and entice more French teachers to our system. And also working with special websites that focus on French immersion teachers, also internationally to us help to ensure that we're getting the staff that we need in place. So there's a number of things we're trying to do proactively. I know that doesn't solve your experience in this moment, but we're certainly going to work hard over that next week or so while we review our enrollment and staffing and try to ensure that we fill the vacancies that we have in place.
Thank you, Trustee Mundy. Tracy, do you have a supplemental question?
Just to follow up to that, and I appreciate everything that you have just said. I've been listening very diligently even before I came in. But I'm going to just circle back to my question of what can be done other than, yes, you're hiring teachers and the whole process of that. And I know that's not an overnight thing, but for the children, what can be done for them in the immediate future, like in the next couple of weeks, so that they are not feeling this insecurity and instability of this concept. Like this year alone, we've been less than 2 weeks, September 9, 2 weeks. My daughter's grade 6, 5-6 French immersion morning has had 5 supply teachers, less than 2 weeks. So I'm asking, is there something being done with teachers to check in on these students, see how they're doing? You know, supply teachers are just coming and going and they're there for a day or two. They're not invested. Do you know what I mean? So is someone checking on these kids? Is there some sort of testing that can be done to see what level they're at, even to see where they have fallen behind, which kids need some help?
I think I would like to request Superintendent Lazarus, who can speak a little bit more from the French curriculum in terms of the supports available.
Well, thank you, Tracy, for your question. Very good question. And anytime we're advised of a situation like the one that you're experiencing at your school, we dispatch the FSL facilitator to meet with the teacher and with the principal to certainly do some planning with the preliminary planning with the teacher. The facilitator advises the teacher of how to access the supports and resources on our website and activities and lessons. And the facilitator also meets with key staff members, the CERT, who will provide the kinds of support that you're looking for your children, for the children in the class, and also the teacher librarian. She will meet with the teacher librarian to look at resources that they have in the library to help support the teacher, because we know once we get the teacher and the lessons in place, and we work with the CERT on the mental health and well-being of our children, we should see success again in this vein. But we recognize the issue, and we will do our best, certainly, and to work with your school. And we have dispatched the FSL facilitator, who will be meeting with your principal, the principal of your school, tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for that response. And Tracy, we definitely understand where you're coming from and where the children in the class are coming from. So hopefully we have resolution in the very near future. Thank you for coming forward.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have two presentations. The first one is the annual operational plan, and we're going to go to the senior team, and I expect that Director Marsh will speak to that.
Thank you, Chair Morton, and just wait for the presentation to come up. So this is our annual Ignite Learning Action Plan year-end update. And if we flip to the first slide, just want to ensure that as we're doing this work, where we begin is the strategic plan and the pillars of it. Not sure thank you, there we go. So these are the pillars that in all the work that we do, we look at the goals under each of these pillars and look at how we best address achieving these goals within each annual year. The annual plan is one that we work our way through different strategies depending on the year, and look at what we believe are the most promising and rich strategies in terms of getting leverage in terms of achieving the goals that are here. If we go then to the next slide, thank you. So within the report to you, we do look at 4 stages of implementation, with starting with 1 as awareness and all the way to 4 in terms of full implementation. Because the annual plan is annual, you shouldn't see too many 4s when we are introducing a new strategy, because of course it takes time to get to that full implementation. As we achieve full implementation, we then think that that's a sustainable practice. And so then we move forward in terms of what's the next layer of rich strategies that we can use to ensure that we're meeting the goals of the strategic plan. So they do range again from 1 to 4. This year, education generally is very complex work in terms of all of the factors, but certainly under the circumstances of a worldwide pandemic, it has added some layers to implementing the strategic plan. We are grateful that the trustees made the determination that we would have a little bit longer with this strategic plan in terms of addressing the worldwide pandemic, as well as continuing to support the growth of every student. Last year, we launched a focus on collaboration with all staff, as we understood that creativity and innovation are not top down, but rather need to be fostered within a collaborative culture. Furthermore, given the complexity of the work that we have to do, we recognize the need to leverage expertise and professional knowledge of many to prioritize the annual operational plan and the strategic goals it hopes to achieve. From January to April, which this report out to you is from January until June, wanted to flag that from January to April, we experienced challenges as staff respected the COVID protocol of isolating when they had symptoms, which you may recall led to unprecedented shortages of vocational staff. For that reason, we did have to pause professional learning and some of the initiatives to keep the priority on schools being open. And we reassigned all central staff on an as-needed basis to take on the role of teacher within schools when our occasional teacher lists were empty because of the number of absences due to COVID protocols. Then from April to June, schooling went remote for all students except for those with the most exceptional needs. And that presented, again, unique needs in terms of the work that staff do, because like all parents across Ontario, they were responsible for providing remote learning to their classes while their own children were also at home. And so again, as a result of that, PD was impacted somewhat during that period. I should note that in addition to pandemic management, we saw an increased volume of hiring, so many new teachers, and we did prioritize the continued professional learning of those new to the profession to assist them in their transition to their professional life. And also in our own team, we welcomed 3 superintendents who were either new to the role or new to the district or both. So it has certainly been a year of transition. We have set structures in place to integrate the work and focus on Indigenous rights and human rights as we look to support every child. Given the year we had, we have a great sense of appreciation for all those who engaged in the work of moving the goals of the strategic plan forward. This is a retrospective look at January to June, and we very much look forward to sharing this year's next steps in terms of the annual plan with trustees at the board in October. But today is a retrospective look, and I'm very happy to turn it over now to members of the team to walk you through some of the highlights. Thank you.
Good evening. Even given the challenges with providing professional development last year as a result of COVID-19, we were very pleased with the number of staff who attended voluntary and digitally accessed live and pre-recorded professional development on a variety of topics. Embedded within those opportunities to attend PD were foundational learning on both assessment and universal design. We also provided resources and learning opportunities through our Choosing My Success counselors for both staff and families related to the new de-streamed mathematics course to support equity of outcomes for all.
Although limited by system professional learning opportunities last year, we were quite successful in providing responsive and differentiated support and resources to educators, administrators, and school teams as we collectively focused on building familiarity with the newly introduced math curriculum and building in considerations of culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy into math teaching. There are now a wide range of Ddsb created and provincially provided professional learning videos, classroom resources, lessons, and tasks available to Ddsb teachers. In addition, our board's focus on the use of innovative digital tools and resources enhanced our system support for mathematics teaching and learning last year and provided further learning about the new curriculum. As an example, use of the board purchased tool Knowledge Hook continued to expand in both our elementary and secondary schools. This tool, in addition to others, modeled how lessons and tasks could be structured to align with the 2020 Ontario math curriculum. The differentiated approach to support school teams included school-based facilitator support, ongoing office hours, after-school workshops, and weekly curriculum currents department email updates shared across the system. Sessions specific to new teachers were also offered through our new teacher induction program. Last year, interdepartmental collaboration between curriculum staff and inclusive student services focused on how to align the new math curriculum to individual education plans. The purpose of this collaboration was to support educators and schools in their development and implementation of focused, measurable individual education plans designed to build on students' strengths within an asset-based approach. Next slide.
Roles and responsibilities of the Positive School Climates Department were reframed to align with our board's commitment to Indigenous inherent rights and to better reflect the shift in mindset where we support schools to develop a positive climate in which our students can thrive.
Our district commitment to fostering well-being and mental health has a focus on mental health literacy and capacity building to create the conditions that lead to safe, respectful, inclusive, and welcoming learning and working environments. Achievements during the time period included professional learning with a focus on setting the foundations for examination and change of our practices, year 1 of a well-being youth worker pilot program, implementation of a mental health index tool to set foundation in identifying areas of growth for us as a district in supporting staff well-being, and increased staffing and services responsive to student mental health needs. Next slide, please.
I would like to highlight 4 leading and learning opportunities that took place last year. First, the Aspiring Leadership Development Sessions. There were 4 sessions covering topics about pathways to leadership, equitable leadership, building emotional intelligence, having courageous conversations, and shining during interviews. In total, 426 educators participated in these sessions. Surveys from the participants indicated very high levels of satisfaction with the usefulness of the material. Additionally, 63 aspiring teacher leaders have engaged in individual coaching conversations in support of their leadership journey, and over half of them have indicated their desire to pursue a role in school administration within the next 5 years. Second, during the spring 2021 promotion process, Ddsb was seeking elementary and secondary vice principals along with elementary principals, and we attracted 48 candidates who participated in the promotion process. The supports provided during the promotion process included a wide variety of opportunities such as preparing a leadership portfolio, mock interviews, and study groups. 36 of 48 candidates were promoted to positions on the short list. And the third item is to highlight the Leaders Learn series. It is a series of learning sessions specifically designed for experienced principals who are looking to develop their leadership skills or who may be aspiring to be superintendents. This is a 2-year program. We completed year 1 last year. In year 1, we offered modules to 19 superintendent hopefuls with a focus on leadership journeys, lessons learned, decision-making through the human rights lens, and authentic leadership. On the next slide, I will focus on the 4th and final highlight, which was the Vice Principal Network. We were poised to offer 5 half-day sessions designed to build leadership capacity for elementary, and secondary vice principals. The topics include fostering inclusive practices, Indigenous education, land acknowledgement, and treaty education, observe, listen, act, addressing anti-Black racism within our schools, and pivoting to lead a mentally healthy school. We look forward to running some more of these sessions once the pause on professional development has been lifted. Thank you.
And thank you. And we know during the last school year, it was important that we had a responsive leadership as we worked through all of the challenges related to the pandemic. As part of that, a focus from Human Resource Services was on providing accommodation and ensuring that we had our employees able to work and meet those accommodations. We also began a return to work steering committee who had 2 actions that they focused on. One was the implementation of an incident notification tool This tool was piloted with facilities, and it allowed easier use for supervisors to be able to provide information related to any incident, and also to provide all the necessary information so that abilities management could follow up quickly. We look forward to implementing this system-wide. The second action was to encourage an early and safe return to work by providing additional staff to overlap during that transition back to work. Due to the pandemic school closures, there was limited opportunities to see outcomes from this strategy, but we do know in the places where we were able to use it, it did create positive return to work. Also, we wanted to provide specific training for our leaders in the system. Ddsb entered a partnership with Tend Academy and provided training to our clinical staff who were leading crisis response support. We also provided compassion fatigue training was offered to all Ddsb staff, and 724 staff attended. We also provided trauma-informed awareness training for administrators and supervisors, and 127 attended those sessions as well. Next slide.
Thank you. We are privileged to have deep and meaningful relationships with Indigenous community partners in the Durham District School Board. These relationships have allowed us to engage in ongoing consultation and collaboration with the Ddsb Indigenous Education Advisory Circle, Ddsb Treaty Partners, Kina Now Indigenous Employee Network, and Indigenous scholars. These consultation groups allowed us and guided the updated land acknowledgement procedure, the draft Indigenous education procedure, and curriculum resource development on residential schools, treaties, Indigenous histories, and contributions of Indigenous peoples. All of these resources were created in alignment with the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Outdoor education created resources and shared resources with educators to encourage and support learning on and from the land. And outdoor education teams supported school-based learning opportunities for students. Staff from 9 secondary schools engaged in school-based professional development to support year 1 implementation of contemporary First Nation, Métis, and Inuit voices, grade 11 English. Also, in collaboration with the curriculum department, course guidelines and resources were created to support the implementation of this course with a focus on student voice, choice, critical thinking, and anti-colonial practices. Next slide, please.
Ifiani Onuoha, a thought leader who believes in making the world a better place for everyone, has been noted as saying, "Nothing gets transformed in your life," and I would add in your school, "until the mind is transformed." And this certainly has been the mantra of the Equity Department. We began the groundwork for systemic change to occur with professional learning led by Dr. Nicole Westburns. Follow-up sessions included facilitation at school staff meetings, coaching with school leaders from every family of schools, coaching with school-based educators, and coaching for all speech and language pathologists, transforming minds. Inclusive Student Services also created a well-being toolkit for families to address anti-Black racism and its impact. This year, the team presented the toolkit at a well-attended parent engagement virtual session with over 600 parent, guardian, community attendees. Collaboration and integration of portfolios, again, transforming minds. This past year, due to the pandemic, we had to reimagine how to implement some of our programs. One such program was the Cypher Conference, which became a webinar series for grades 6 to 8 students. Over 15,000 students from 102 elementary schools accessed this program on a virtual platform, exploring topics such as challenging anti-Black racism, exploring Black masculinity, bias and microaggressions, conspiring for allyship, once again, transforming minds to impact and change lives. Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future, and our students are the future, and we don't want to miss them. Next slide. Oh, same slide.
As we worked with our affinity network partners, we were able to design a student census report back to the Black community. With the guidance of the Durham Black Educator Network and members of the Equity Ad Hoc Committee, A community engagement experience was constructed around the priorities of the community. We made public our commitment to transparency about data collection. We engaged community voice in identifying and addressing systemic barriers or discriminatory practices imposed upon students and gathered advice on what we were missing. This engagement experience was attended by 484 participants. Information gathered from this evening is directly influencing the work we are doing this year, understanding who it is that we serve in our schools and what intersection of identities students may choose to share in DDSB learning environments. Next slide, please.
Last fall and winter, we initiated the first phase of a broad community consultation process on our framework for developing a human rights policy. And based on feedback from that initial process, we have created a draft policy package. The package includes an overarching policy that sets out commitments, principles, objectives, and approaches to uphold human rights and to prevent all forms of discrimination in our services and in our employment. And the draft policy has 4 procedures to go along with it. The first is about prevention and includes specific actions and requirements to proactively identify, prevent, and address discrimination and discriminatory barriers in our learning and working environments. The second procedure focuses on inclusive design and sets out the accommodation process for both students and employees. The third procedure outlines the steps to raise and to effectively resolve and address student and community human rights issues, incidents, and complaints. And the fourth procedure supports safe and respectful workplaces for employees and covers the employee complaints resolution process. In addition, the package also includes a draft responsibilities and accountability framework that sets out both individual and shared organizational roles and responsibilities for upholding human rights. Together, the policy, the procedures, and the framework focus on individual and systemic approaches and actions to help us meet our commitments to human rights and equity. And we look forward to bringing that draft policy package to you later this fall. But in the meantime, planning is underway to support implementation. So for example, we developed a resource to help guide decision-making that is grounded in human rights principles. And we also provided professional development opportunities about human rights requirements and how they apply to our services in our workplaces. And we're also planning for the second phase of community consultations. And as we continue the work, we continue to apply and embed human rights principles and responsibilities into other policies and procedures and in system initiatives. So for example, the naming of schools policy, school learning plans, and the district professional development plan. Next slide, please.
Virtual learning platforms have increased the opportunity for caregivers and families from across the district to participate in parent engagement initiatives. With a focus on collaboration between school communities, regions, and school community councils, 24 parent reaching out grant projects were approved, which involved 66 school communities across the district and 3 DDSB affinity networks. Parent engagement virtual events were extremely well attended. 2 parent engagement series events were offered. Strategies to stay healthy in a stressful world, which had approximately 320 participants. And how to talk to your children about anti-Black racism, which had approximately 600 participants. 375 participants attended the Parents as Partners Symposium, Embracing Our Identities to Elevate Student Success. And almost 3,000 staff, which is about 25%, participated in the employee experience checkpoint. As well, and mentioned earlier, those virtual platforms really increased access for parents, families, and caregivers. And we saw that with regards to the Special Education Advisory Committee, as well as the virtual platform allowed for that increase in public access. Next slide.
Innovation is about creativity, thinking inside and outside the box, possibilities, finding efficiencies, improvement, and continuous learning. To make this happen, there must be interdepartmental planning, action, assessment, observation, and reflection. Learning for a system cannot happen in isolation. Integration is key, collaboration is key, alignment is key, coherence is key. As you see throughout the operational goals, no pillar stands alone. Like well-being and equity, innovation is woven into all the work that we do when we keep students at the center of the work. This year, we explored rich innovative tools with the virtual environment, contributing to the learning in each classroom across the system. This year, over 1,000 educators and approximately 20,000 students actively participated in the innovative teaching and learning opportunities at DDSB at Home. We also established and used a central site called Spark, where we work together as departments to create professional hubs, learning modules, which we call Learning on Demand, that all employees can access, and menus of learning opportunities to increase their professional knowledge with sessions such as human rights in our work and school environments. All interdepartmental professional development opportunities are housed, most are housed in Spark. Finally, we work in collaboration with our assessment and accountability team to gather data about learning, assessment through thought exchanges that we did bi-monthly, Google Form surveys, and focus groups. We heard the voices of students, staff, and parents, and used the feedback to continually plan forward using the teaching and learning cycle of plan, act, observe, assess, reflect, and plan again as an interdepartmental team. Thank you.
That concludes some of the highlights. I'm more than happy to take any questions that trustees may have, Chair Morton. And if they want to direct it to a specific presenter, to feel free to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. An amazing amount of work has gone into our annual operational plan, and I thank everyone for their contributions to that. Questions? I see Trustee Barrett with a hand up. Michael?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question, it's under the engagement piece. I believe I got to make sure I've got the right one here, because there is significant information here, and like Carolyn, I appreciate that. It was with regards to the engagement piece on being able to interact with employees, and there was some additional survey work done in June of 2021. There was some groups that were done, recognizing that this was we look back a couple of years, a key critical component of our board's culture. Can you just expand a little bit or on kind of what the next steps are? Are we expecting actions out of that? What's the next steps? Because it is a key critical component of, and we've all kind of agreed to that, so.
Superintendent Mundy, do you want to take the lead?
Sure, I can. Thank you. Through you, Chair. We're in the process of reviewing the information from the employee experience checkpoint. You know what, there was some initial, we were pleased to see the number of staff involved, and it's quite more extensive questions that provide us with information to support next steps. We will be sharing it with the senior team. We will then also be preparing a report for board in October. And as part of that, we will be looking at what are some actions that we can do related to the information and the data that we've received to continue to build toward a real positive culture. And some of the things that Superintendent Davis mentioned in her presentation around collaboration and engagement and involvement and well-being. So we look forward to providing more information in October to you and then also to the system.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Morton.
Thank you. Trustee Barnes, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say again, a tremendous amount of work and presentation that has gone through. I'm really excited about, and we thought nothing was happening. It's just an amazing amount of work that we've done. I love that we have now talked about integrating the pillars and that they don't no longer stand alone. I think that is, again, a cultural shift that we're working on in regards to making sure that everybody works together. But I'm also very wondering in regards to learning, because this has been a very fluid year that's gone by, and I'm thinking it's going to be very fluid year coming up. So I'm wondering, in regards to moving forward, what kind of I want to see a path, but as fail-safes do we have in place to make sure that the plans that we have accomplished, we're going to continue moving forward for the next school year?
Thank you, Trustee Barnes.
I'm happy to start, but I also, because it's integrated work, I'm just wondering whether or not Andrea, Jack, Superintendent Macaulay or Negro or Nevels, if one of you would like to start, and then we can go from there.
Sure. Good evening, and through you, Chair. I think when we look at the momentum of centering who our students are and then putting in responsive programming that envelops their well-being and then moves them forward on learning plans, the integration that you've heard tonight is certainly authentic across our teams and integration with their schools as well. And you'll see a number of pieces move forward this year, including how our schools are focusing on their students and how we wrap around our school teams. But really about personalizing the experience for our individual students and then building the educator and support staff, professional learning, support their well-being. I'm often reminded by our mental health leader, Stephanie Pellebor, to learn well, students require well staff. And so that's what you've heard tonight in terms of our commitment, both in terms of across the district to Ddsb staff members, so that they can then pour that energy into students. But the integration you hear tonight is absolutely authentic in our day-to-day work, both at the district level and within schools. And I would respectfully turn it over. I believe Superintendent Negro has come on camera as well.
Thanks, Superintendent Macaulay. And just to address the question, I think it's important to note that collaboration between departments continues. In fact, we are in the midst of planning some common learning for all central board staff over the next few weeks to really prepare them to integrate every pillar of our strategic plan so that it comes out coherent to our schools and our schools don't experience initiative overload so that they can focus really on achievement and well-being of our students on a daily basis. So we're hoping to reach all our schools and staff within our schools with some more regular opportunities to engage this year. We're hoping for that. We've learned a lot about how to engage with them in different ways, not just in person, but virtually and in different modes and at different times. So we look to continue that momentum this year as we continue to serve our students across the district.
Thank you.
I'll also add, if that's okay, Chair Morton.
Sure, absolutely.
One of the things we've been very intentional about is to try to position the learning of students in terms of looking at students as in a holistic manner. And so we've asked educators, for example, while we know it may be tempting to look specifically at certain skills, to look at the benchmarks in terms of reading, writing, and numeracy, we also recognize that we need to put that in perspective of who the child is and how the child learns and their interests. So for example, often it's that music class, it's that phys ed class that actually helps the student then do better. And there's clear research that shows the connection between those areas. So we've been very intentional in saying to educators that we're going to collect a wealth of data points in terms of understanding where our students are at and how they are doing. It's not just one source of data, it's going to be multiple sources, some external like EQAO and some internal. And so it's really important we put everything in balance with one another to understand that what we're doing is not looking just at robots in terms of one particular skill set. We're trying to create that curiosity and joy of learning so that the outcomes in terms of academic skills will be there for the students. And I think a good example of that is we are revising the school learning plans. We will be doing that in collaboration with school administrators. Superintendent Negro and team are leading that work. And so one of the things we want to focus in, what are some leading indicator data sources that we can use within the school, not only about reading, writing, and mathematics, but also about how students' sense of belonging and engagement, that sense of flow, how that is helping them as learners as we help them grow throughout the system. So I think that will be a really productive focus for the system. We talk about the idea of humanizing education, and that's really trying to look at the whole student and the student's needs.
Thank you. Great answers. Good question, Patrice, and I really appreciate those answers. Trustee Stone, do you have any question or an observation?
I have a couple of questions. Thank you for this comprehensive report. It's great. I loved reading through it. The page 7, though, I wondered why you're talking about data collection to be started on outcomes for students with learning disabilities, both diagnosed and identified. I just wondered, I was kind of surprised that this wasn't already being done. Is there a reason why it had been not started until now?
So thank you, and through you, Chair, if that's all right. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So when we look at our students with learning disabilities, we know this is the largest cohort of learners within our students who identify as having special education strengths and needs. And when we began to look at the data and really look at who each student is as a learner, and their learning profile, one of the ahas for our team was that we actually have a few categories of students within that cluster, and we really need to understand them differently in order to appropriately match their programming and accommodation and training for their educators. So what that looks like and sounds like for our students is that we have a group of learners who have a formal diagnosis of a learning disability, so average to high intelligence, and the processing where we need to accommodate, pulling out all of their great ideas and knowledge and strengths. But we also have another cohort of learners who, through IPRC and a category of communication LD, are learning and have accommodations as well, but we don't quite have that diagnosis component. And the two groups have very different needs within the classroom. So our commitment last year, and why Director Marsh referenced the stage numbers as well, and why you see a 2 on this, is our commitment last year, led through our psychological services team, was to actually go back physically within all of the assessment information for all of our learners with LD and begin to pull out who are in those different groups and have conversations with educators. With COVID and not wanting to send staff across sites and into OSRs, we paused that project. And we turned our focus onto the professional learning, but we're going to now go back to that this year and really tease out which kids are in which kind of subgroup, because when we look at the accommodations fitting a student with the diagnosis, they are not likely to fit the students that are without diagnosis. So we really need to tease out and be better fitting the accommodations for each of our individual learners. And then, as Director Marsh said, another layer to that is also understanding the interests and the engagement and pieces like that. So I think as education, we've generally moved through a phase where we do more time, a computer in a quiet space in terms of our kids with LD. And we're really moving in our understanding of personalizing their learning experience. And that starts with that foundation of really understanding that learning piece and then being able to support their educators.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
On page 9, the corporate services excellence, I just wondered, maybe some people will think 25% is a good number, is maybe a decent number of people to respond, but I just wondered whether or not we figured out why we didn't get more of a response, because I think that's an important area. Is there any way we can draw people more people in to more staff in to participate in that. And also, I wondered what communication and collaboration identified as areas for growth. If you could talk a little bit about that. Do we know why or where this is failing?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. When we look at the 25%, the 3,000, it's important to recognize that we have approximately 11,000 employees, of which almost 4,000 are occasional supply staff. So we know that the bulk of the people who responded were our permanent employees. So likely the average that we have is a higher participation of our permanent staff, but we didn't pull out all of the different occasional staff for us to be actually able to identify that. So I know it doesn't look as high as maybe we would think, but when we look at it comparison to 7,000 permanent employees, it's a pretty good response for these type of surveys. And considering we did it in June of the pandemic during school closures, I think we were pretty pleased with the response. Of course, we'd like to see it increased, and I think part of that comes with building trust in terms of how we use the information. The two areas, and this was a very brief report that was provided by Howitt, and so I don't have a lot of details from the initial report that was shared here. Certainly communication and continuing to build collaboration where I think voices are at the table and they see their voices included in the actions and the events, et cetera, that's happening at the system level, which is something that we're significantly focused on as we move forward. I think when we bring the report back to board in October, we'll be able to go a little bit deeper into the data and explain a bit more of that in our actions related. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. I do have a couple of observations and a question. Carrying on from Linda's comment from Success, we talked about the importance of communication and collaboration, but I would also like to say that I'm very pleased that we're seeing strengths which were apparent in the safe work environment and level of integrity. Both of those are extremely important. My other observation is the number of 3 and 4 stages. So with partial implementation and full implementation, I think that the level 3, the level 4, we are doing very well. I do have a question for Superintendent Macaulay, and this is to do with well-being. On the bottom of page 38, we talk about the well-being youth workers provided social emotional learning programs to 58 schools totaling 4,600 students. I'm wondering the role of COVID in this, and are we going to continue with this program and hopefully expand upon it?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So thank you for that. The Wellbeing Youth Worker Pilot Project was leveraging COVID funding within the 2021 school year, and we saw 10 workers. With the adjustment in COVID resources for this year at a different dollar amount, and then through to the first 50% of the school year, we do have 5 workers who are on contract with us from September to January, and who are working with schools currently at this time. The team ebbs and flows. We work both in person and with Ddsb at home. We actually started back in August with the 2 modified elementary schools as our first 2 schools for the 21-22 school year. And we're currently doing reach backs to the schools that had the pilot project through last year, as well as adding schools for this fall, and just trying to build that capacity with staff, come alongside. The workers also work in connection with our psych and social work staff as we look at that well-being footprint and the staff that support that. But the pilot has moved into 2 years, year 2, but with an FTE of 5 and through contract positions pending the extension into the second half of the school year. So we look forward to bringing further update on that.
Thank you. Should we be advocating for increased funding from the province for that?
Through you. So we have a number of staff that work with a mental health focus in schools. And similar to this evening, when we take an integrated approach, we know that staff across departments are speaking the language of social emotional learning, such as we see within the math curriculum and the co-learning there. We see our school leaders speaking the language of mentally healthy schools and drawing on the resources such as from School Mental Health Ontario and the first 20 days. And then we start to come over into our staff where we see speech language pathologists having well-being and connecting conversations with families, and then across into our tier 3, tier 4, where our staff are doing some more intensive clinical connects, both one-on-one with students as well as with community partners. So I would always say there's always room for growth. Absolutely. There's always room for more dollars. We are in a bit of a mental health crisis, but across ministries. And so advocacy within education always comes at a balance point with our community partners that are also doing heavy lifting for families and youth in our region. And so if I had a lean, we would always push dollars close to student experience. I think as a group of trustees, you know that we're about 97% staffing within the ISS and mental health budget, because we want to drive the dollars as close to immediate contact with the students as possible. But I would actually advocate for cross-ministerial collaboration because of the impacts for our kids with complex needs where that is currently a barrier.
Thank you, Superintendent McCauley. Greatly appreciated. Before I see no more hands, but before we carry on, I'm going to ask Andrew Hunter and John Rennie to look at one of our student trustees. Demario is having an internet connection problem, and maybe you could reach out to Demario and hopefully help him, because we definitely want him to participate in our meeting. Thank you, Andrew and John. Carrying on, we have another DDSB presentation. This time we're going to look at our summer learning programs. And I'm going to call upon Superintendent Jack Negro and many different people who will be supporting him. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Denise is just pulling up the presentation. Madam Chair, summer ends in about 24 hours. And before that happens, we want to report to you on the summer learning opportunities offered by DDSB, and the report begins on page 61 of the agenda package. It outlines the various summer programs made available to thousands of DDSB students, and you will have noticed a significant amount of parental involvement in many of the programs. Tonight, we have system leads Denise Nickerson, Monique Muller, and Senior Manager Carolyn Usher with us to provide highlights of some of these experiences for our students. So Denise will start us off.
Good evening, everyone. I am honored to start this presentation with my colleagues, Carolyn and Monique. During July and August of 2021, the Durham District School Board offered a range of summer learning opportunities for elementary and secondary students. All programs were aligned to culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and promoted a joy of learning through fun, interactive, and collaborative tasks and activities. Leveraging the expertise of central staff through interdepartmental planning ensured that summer programs incorporated high-impact practices for academic and social emotional learning and development. The Indigenous Education and ESL department hosted 2 3-week programs that provided 5 hours of daily learning. The SLP programs were not only committed to student well-being, but also to developing educator expertise. 245 students from across the DDSB in senior kindergarten to grade 8 joined the 2 Indigenous focused classes and the 10 ESL classes, with the majority of students in the primary division. The SLP was fortunate to partner with the Focus on Youth summer program, where 12 high school students were essential to bridging connections to secondary school and supporting students throughout the summer. Making connections to our community and having a variety of engaging field trips that encouraged oral literacy and social emotional numeracy skills, which allowed students to see places and things they would not have normally had the opportunity to experience. Indigenous scholars contributed to the rich, ongoing learning for all students and educators. The outdoor environmental education staff visited with all classrooms and provided numerous opportunities to connect with the outdoors and allow students to ask inquiry questions. Collaboration with the Ontario Tech University allowed students to explore various STEM and coding sessions with their summer instructors. Daily literacy and numeracy blocks provided individual and group instruction that supported oral language, reading, and writing. Focusing on intermediate literacy by having a specialized secondary teacher to support the transition to high school for our grades 7 and 8 students allowed students to embed technology as a way to access the curriculum and demonstrate their thinking and learning. Having a guided art session as a celebration was a fun and unique way for families to come together and celebrate the completion of the summer learning program. Parents additionally had 4 drop-in sessions throughout the summer to connect with the SLP leads to learn how they can continue to support their child's learning. Aside from a multitude of special events and field trips, students were able to guide their own inquiry-based learning, and they each completed digital portfolios that were shared with their caregivers and school administrators. I think I forgot to click the audio for this little video clip, so I'm just going to proceed and let my colleagues take over the next session.
Click the more in the top.
Hi, my name is Mia, and I love the EFL because I learn about animals, and the math is fun, and I do so much games.
What I really like about ESL summer camp is it's fun. The teachers are really nice. Thanks for teaching us in summer learning program. We learn lots of stuff. We learn about animals, about flip grades. I like art, and I like STEM, and I like coding.
Good evening. This summer, Durham Continuing Education welcomed over 6,200 students across several programs. With the support of teachers, special education resource teachers, educational assistants, ESL coaches and tutors, structures and interventions were in place and available to all students supporting in their success. As indicated in the report, we were able to offer both online synchronous and asynchronous e-learning modalities. A highlight of summer 2021 was the successful implementation of a new international elementary language program focusing on Farsi. This program arose from interest in the local community, and we were fortunate to run 2 classes. Next slide, please. This summer, we offered 2 unique programs with a focus on helping students have a successful transition to high school. Through the Grade 8 Re-Engagement Initiative, Pathway counselors connected with 177 families of grade 8 students who had disengaged from their learning. They worked with families and elementary schools and secondary schools to identify individual needs, strengths, and pathway goals in order to create a comprehensive transition support plan, which included access to Ddsb supports, summer learning opportunities, and secondary teams to ensure a successful entry into grade 9. Our second unique program is a revision of the Getting Ready for High School program. This program, called the Blueprint Project, had over 29 students participate this summer. This learning opportunity, organized by the Durham Black Educators Network, provides Black students with a culturally responsive program focused on navigating the high school experience. Through this program, students center the conversation on empowerment, excellence, advocacy, and well-being to build skills to ensure success throughout high school. Thank you. Next slide.
Good evening.
get my notes here. We were excited and honored this year to partner with the Durham Catholic District School Board to offer a range of support for caregivers and students throughout the summer. Commencing in June and continuing to the end of September, parent workshops were offered on a variety of topics, including Thriving During the Summer Pandemic, led by parenting expert Jennifer Kolari, Supporting Your Child's Mental Health Through the Impact of Racism and Depression with noted mental health expert Charmaine Lane, and Supporting Your Young Child's Social and Emotional Development During the Return to School with the folks from Sick Kids. So far, we've had 160 caregivers register, and we have 2 more sessions available. You can register online. This partnership also encompassed connections with our community partners who offered a wide range of group supports for our students. Taibu Community Health, Caria Community Health, and Family Services Durham provided virtual groups designed to support young people with stress, anxiety, self-esteem, identity, healthy relationships, and resilience, to name a few things. About 135 students accessed these programs this summer. Next slide, please. During the summer months, members of the Ddsb social work and psychological services teams continue to offer direct service to students and families. Using the Connect with Your Mental Health Team button, which is on our main website, students could speak with a member of our team. Our engagement workers, who are social workers, were connected with students and their families where students had disengaged from school last year. The work focused on addressing barriers to engagement and developing connection to education colleagues and mental health staff. As well, a series of virtual drop-in sessions for Black youth were also offered, focused on mental health, well-being, self-esteem, and identity. And finally, members of the social work and speech and language teams offered virtual groups for caregivers just prior to the return to school, with a focus on supporting a mentally healthy transition to the classroom. Our summer services reached an additional 130 young people and their families. Thank you.
And of course, we always collect feedback about our programs, and these represent a sample of that feedback. We saw engaged learners, increased confidence, and most importantly, perhaps, joy in student learning. I want to thank Denise, Monique, and Carolyn for joining us tonight for this presentation. This concludes our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you to our superintendent and his team. Very well done. I'm looking for hands for anyone who has a question or a comment. And I see Trustee Barnes with her hand up. Patrice?
Sorry, it's just going to be quick because I know this is getting to be a long night, but I just wanted to congratulate the team. I think the variety of programming that was offered, the levels of engagement that showed us being really purposeful in the things that we were offering students over the summer. And I hope as we go forward, I know we're all about measuring and assessing. So as we measure and assess what has worked and what hasn't worked, I hope we look at some things that we can probably carry on throughout the year that would support students, even though they're back in class. There are a lot of those programs that I thought were very innovative in regards to being able to support students and their parents. And I think it's very good because we hear about the deficit and all this time, that language around COVID and our students that have been online for a year. But I think all of these programs are really positive and back to being holistic and supporting both parents and students. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed the variety of programming that was offered over the summer.
Thank you, Patrice. I do have a question for Monique, and she's not going to be surprised by this question whatsoever. Monique, I'm talking about the grade 8 to grade 9 re-engagement, and I'm rather alarmed that there were 380 grade 8 students who identified as being disengaged. Are we going to track these people so that in the next 2 and 3 years, they don't fall through the cracks on us?
So yes, to answer your question, Trustee Morton, we are tracking the students currently. We're working closely with the secondary teams. So each student has been connected with student success, guidance, ISS teams. If it is the Indigenous department as well, as well as ELL coaches. And we're going to continue to work and support these students until we see that they're, sort of stabilized in their transition and that they're doing well and that we're seeing success.
Thank you kindly, and I'm very pleased that you will do that. I knew you were going to do that, Monique. Thank you. Seeing no hands, let's move on to the report from the Committee of the Whole in camera. So I will go to Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in camera and adopted the motions made at the Committee of the Whole in camera meeting as follows. The disclosure of intimate personal or financial information in respect of a member of the board or committee, an employee or a prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian. And with regards to litigation, employee relations issues only if a motion is brought forward regarding mandatory vaccinations. Chair Morton, this is my report.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher, for your report. Director Marsh, we are eager to hear good news. We've had a lot of good news tonight, but we are eager to hear more. Good news from the system.
Thank you. As always, we have two students to narrate the good news from the system. And I will say that out in schools last week and this week, I was able to meet with some of the narrators, and they talked about how much they enjoyed the experience of doing it. So I'm really happy to have two more students do this month's good news for us as we reflect on the first few weeks. So we'll go ahead and play it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of DDSB students and staff, we are happy to bring you good news from across the system. First, we are excited to welcome new and returning students to DDSB schools for the 2021 to 2022 school year. There's lots of positive energy as we begin another year of learning.
Grove School teacher Justin Hinan was awarded 2021 Educator of the Year by Special Olympics Ontario. Justin is the head coach of the Bolton C. Falby Special Olympics Walking Club, organizer of the 2021 Durham Virtual Sports Festival, manager of the Durham Active Start and Fundamentals program, and community council member of the Greater Durham Special Olympics. Congratulations, Justin.
Over the summer, well-being and mental health workshops are offered to Durham regional parents and guardians. In partnership with Durham Catholic District School Board, these workshops were aimed at supporting positive mental health amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Groups and individual supports were also offered to students and families throughout the summer, including supports for Black youth and school transition supports for students, families, and guardians.
Working on more than 50 projects throughout the summer, facilities services kept busy with ventilation upgrades, library renovations, roofing projects, masonry restorations, childcare projects, and building outdoor classrooms. Some highlights include a roof replacement at Port Perry High School, window replacement at Glen Street Public School, the addition of a family grouping center at Glen Grove Public School, ventilation projects at Uxbridge and Sir John A. Macdonald Public Schools, and 5 additional ventilation projects.
2 new school communities were welcomed to the DDSB family on the first day of school: Rosemary Brown Public School in Ajax and Willows Walk Public School in Whitby. Staff at both schools have been working hard to open the doors and put into practice the values instilled in all DDSB schools: leadership, success, innovation, well-being, and equity through community engagement.
Durham Continuing Education welcomed over 6,200 students, accounting for over 8,300 registrations across several programs this past summer. They supported learners in Durham and from across Ontario in both credit and non-credit programming. Staff were available to all students to support their success. A highlight of the summer was the successful implementation of an international elementary language program focusing on Farsi.
Schools across the district are hosting pop-up vaccine clinics to help communities roll up their sleeves for the first and second vaccine shots throughout September. As of September 21st, 18 high school communities, along with their feeder school families, have been invited to get their vaccination. We continue to work with Durham Region Health Department to facilitate future vaccination clinic opportunities.
The 3rd annual Make a Difference Students in Need campaign has come to an end. The campaign was created to support DDSB families with challenges brought on by the pandemic. Thanks to donations from the Ajax Rotary Club and the Durham Child Nutrition Program, 123 families continued to receive grocery gift cards throughout the summer. totaling $28,525. To date, $123,015 in gift cards have been delivered to the Ddsb families.
Local Olympians Pierce LePage, a former student from Fallingbrook Public School, and Nichelle Prince, a graduate from Pickering High School, represented Canada at the Olympics in Tokyo. Pierce competed in the decathlon, finishing 5th, while Nichelle played in the women's soccer team that won gold. Congratulations to both Pierce and Nichelle.
John Morrison, a retired principal of Anderson CVI, recently became a best-selling author on Amazon. John's book, titled The It Factor: Discover and Unleash Your Own Leadership Potential, is a compilation of interviews John conducted with inspirational and diverse leaders in education across Canada. The book details the insights educators gained from embracing challenges to support their communities. Congratulations, John!
Julie Payette Public School student Samal Ashfaq came out on top of a national 685 entry contest that featured grade 4 to grade 8 students submitting poetry and short stories in the Kids Write for Kids Creative Challenge. Sumal, a grade 8 student, earned the top spot for her poetry collection, The Wonder of Words. Congratulations, Sumal.
As you can see, the dates of significance take us to the end of October.
Thank you to Silla Ann Sajad from RS McLaughlin CVI for reading this month's good news.
Thank you to our students from RS McLaughlin for sharing good news stories. We are so grateful for so many things, and we do need to celebrate all the wonderful things that are happening at the Durham District School Board. Moving on, we have several recommended actions. The first is the report from Trustee Thatcher, committee meeting from September the 7th.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The report from the Standing Committee meeting of September 7th can be found on pages 72 to 81. The following resolution was passed at the Standing Committee meeting, moved by Trustee Michael Barrett, that the draft amended consolidated bylaw be referred back to the Governance and Policy Committee. I move that the board now receive the minutes and approve the actions of the September 7th, 2021 Standing Committee meeting and adopt the resolution that was passed.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher, for that motion. We need to have a seconder. And I would be looking for a hand. Thank you, Trustee Barrett, for seconding that motion. All those in favor of the motion? Again, those hands would be awesome. Thank you. That motion is carried. Moving on, we have an Indigenous education policy, and I would go to Trustee Elmhurst to provide us with that information.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The report can be found on pages 82 to 121 in your package. The report is provided for approval of the Board of Trustees with respect to the proposed Indigenous education policy. As previously shared, the Aboriginal education policy and regulation were last updated on March 17, 2014, and the voluntary confidential First Nation, Métis, and Inuit student self-identification policy and procedure were updated on January 15, 2015. Since then, our knowledge of Indigenous rights and promising anti-colonial Indigenous education practices have developed greatly. The draft Indigenous education policy and subsequent procedures have been guided by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights for Indigenous People, as well as through meaningful consultation with Indigenous community members, which include the Ddsb Indigenous Education Advisory Circle, Kinanao Indigenous Employee Network, the Ddsb Treaty Partners, community members, and Indigenous policy specialists, Nancy Rowe and Cully Fox-Peltier. In December 2020, the Government of Canada passed Bill C-15, which outlines the Government of Canada's responsibility to take all necessary measures to ensure the laws of Canada are consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and that there is an action plan created to achieve the objectives of the declaration. Using UMDRIP as a framework for this policy aligns with Bill C-15. UMDRIP outlines that distinct rights of Indigenous people vary from the rights of equity-seeking groups. This helps provide clarity on the difference between Indigenous education and the work done in equity. I just want to draw your attention to a couple key articles within UMDRIP that really guide the policy and help to set the foundation. So Article 14.2 says Indigenous individuals, particularly children, have the right to all levels and forms of education of the state without discrimination. Article 15.1 states Indigenous peoples have the right to the dignity of diversity of their cultures, traditions, histories, and aspirations, and shall be appropriately reflected in education and public information. Article 13.2 states, states shall take effective measures in consultation and cooperation with the Indigenous peoples centered and concerned to combat prejudice and eliminate discrimination and to promote tolerance, understanding, and good relationships amongst Indigenous people and all other segments of society. The draft policy focuses on centering exactly some of those key articles. It centers Indigenous rights. It's committed to furthering Ddsb's systemic commitment to reconciliation, preventing anti-Indigenous racism, and addressing the disproportionate outcomes experienced by Indigenous students in our system. The draft Indigenous education policy and accompanying procedure were initially presented and discussed at the June 7th, 2021 Standing Committee meeting. At the Board of Trustees meeting on June 21st, a notice of motion was presented to bring the matter forward at the next regular board meeting to consolidate and update the Aboriginal education policy and the voluntary confidential First Nation Métis and Inuit student self-identification policy. Following that meeting on June 21st with the Board of Trustees, the Ddsb engaged in another session of public and community consultation. The draft policy was posted on the board website for public feedback, and community consultations took place. The consultation process led to some minor adjustments from the initial draft policy and procedure. Some of the wording was altered slightly, and these adjustments are tracked on Appendix E and G, with clean copies being provided as Appendix F and H. Our hope in sharing all the appendices is to reflect the stages of the draft policy development and the consultation process. It is recommended that the Board of Trustees approves the revisions as presented, and this report is provided for the approval of the Board of Trustees with respect to the proposed Indigenous education policy. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. But you might be muted, Carolyn.
That's right, I am. Trustee Forbes, you have a question.
Well, I just want to say I'm so impressed with the amount of consultation, the shift of our public institutions really engaging with our communities when we come to drafting policy and procedures, I think is absolutely critical, and that it's grounded in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is just so powerful, and really it's a long time coming, I think, for many public Canadian institutions. I certainly don't want to cut debate short. I do see Trustee Stone has a question or her hand up, but I would have no reservation about recommending that the Board of Trustees approve the drafts, policies and procedures as distributed in our agenda tonight.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. I was going to ask you to put forward that motion, but I think first I'm going to go to Trustee Stone, who has her hand up.
Thank you, and through your chair, Martin. I have a question regarding the use of the word truths as opposed to perspectives. It's been put in place of perspectives almost all throughout. I want to know what you mean by truth and what's going to be behind that, what ideas and what you're going to be teaching and calling truths as opposed to a perspective. Because if you're going to teach Christianity, you can't necessarily teach it as a truth. It's an ideology, it's a religion, it's a belief system.
And through you, Chair Morton, happy to address that question. And that change, as we said, did come through consultation with our Indigenous community members that felt the word perspectives can sometimes be left fairly open-ended. When we speak about truth, we're speaking about true history and true facts. The policy really outlines that it is not our place in education to be teaching culture. And so those cultural perspectives is not included within the policy or procedure, but rather the truths speak to those historical truths.
Supplemental question, Trustee Stone?
Well, I wish I had a second to just think about that because I would come up with a supplemental, but I'll leave it for now. It does make me uncomfortable, I have to be honest. The word truths, I understand your answer. However, throughout this whole thing, I would like to hear the well, I'm going to use the word perspectives, or what the truths are that are going to be taught. I don't know if you can give me any further example of that.
And through you, Chair Morton, I'm happy to give a couple examples. In terms of truth, we are looking at the history of colonization. We are looking at the true history of residential schools and the impact on Indigenous peoples. Those would be truths that we need to ensure are included in classrooms. We need to include the truth about Indigenous contributions. We need to include the truth about treaties. For us, we are on the territory of the Williams Treaty. We need to understand what was the truth in that treaty and what that treaty was intended to do. So those are some of the truths we're referring to. If we think back to the TRC, residential schools, treaties, contributions, and history, all of those are truths. And that's really what's guiding the curriculum development.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Superintendent Elmhurst. We're going to go to Trustee Barrett for a question.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate, and I was going to build on a little bit on Trustee Stone, because I'll be honest, Aaron, your answer kind of concerned me when we start to talk about truth and history and etc. And I don't disagree with any of your examples, but there's, and as a student of history, and I know there's a huge difference between history and culture. I know there's a huge difference between interpretation and fact. I know that there's a lot of difference between history and the interpretation of history. I know Voltaire always said history was a pack of dirty lies that we play on the dead. That was his quote. And I recognize that there's a significant difference between when you're talking about a cultural piece and truths. But I'll be honest, the answer kind of concerned me a little bit, because as I watch other elements that are happening, truth to some people is being able to mark up a synagogue in Toronto. Truth to some people is being able to suggest that people of different cultures need to be mainlined into other programs, etc., or geared towards things. So I get the uncomfortableness with regards to truth, but that probably made me a little bit more uncomfortable because I watch a lot of people in the United States also talk about truth, and it's not truth. And again, I'm not suggesting this, and I'm not, I don't want to, back up about the whole piece about, the necessity of being able to ensure that there's an understanding. I mean, I'm a student of history. I have a degree from the University of Toronto and never heard about residential schools until I became a trustee. So, I mean, that's just shameful. It is, it's a failing of the system. To think I won't even tell you how old I was when I finally found out. I mean, but that's the shameful piece. So I recognize that there's this piece, and I'm in no way arguing against, but the definition of truth, it scares me sometimes because I recognize that, I get lots of emails that espouse truth. And again, I'm not equating the truth of what you're talking about. So I just want to make sure. But yeah, it's as Trustee Forbes says, there's a in kind of paraphrasing, it's a long time coming, and certainly support fully. But yeah, truth scares me sometimes because it's always the interpretation. So thank you. It was just a comment. So
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Trustee Forbes, do you want to make a comment, or are you prepared to put forward your motion? And the reason I ask is Trustee Crawford has his hand up.
Well, I don't want to stifle debate. I know the process is once the motion is made that, it takes precedence, but I think that understanding that the dominant culture and its view of history, and as it's been taught as Trustee Barrett stated, and in the omissions, and that haven't been, and perspectives and truths, people's truths. I don't think that we're really in a position to deny people their truths and their lived experiences. But I will be prepared to make the motion after Trustee Crawford speaks.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I didn't want to, if we get into discussing wording again, it could be a long session and go into several weeks. The most important thing is that we have a policy, and not just this policy, but this is an amendment of a policy that we've had in place for quite a while. One of the things I was going to ask about was on the process. I see the first few pages of this, everything is stroked out. Just generally speaking, was it that the other policy had to have so many changes that you stroked it out and started anew? Could you comment on that?
Absolutely, and through you, Chair Morton. Now you'll see some of the components of the policy pre-existing living within the current policy. The way in which it was structured, we didn't pull specific lines over, so that made it quite difficult to just pull out portions of it. However, some of the core content may live within the current policy. And to be honest, that policy was created at a time where the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit framework had been released by the Ministry of Education. That policy is being revamped, and the reason it's being revamped is to align with UNDRIP and TRC, so it will look totally different. And so the original policy was created on the basis of that framework, which was created approximately 2017, prior to the TRC, prior to UNDRIP. So our whole philosophy behind Indigenous education has changed since then. And that was why it needed to have such a significant shift.
Okay, just to, in short then, you might have kept some of the words and paragraph from the previous one, but you just put it into this one. It was just much easier to start over with a new document, so to speak. And
Trustee Crawford, are you having problems with your mute button? Trustee Crawford, are you there? Going back to Trustee Forbes. Trustee Forbes, I ask you to turn to the recommendation on page 83. And could you state your motion, please?
Yeah, that the Board of Trustees approve the.
I lost connection.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. At the present time, we've just asked Trustee Forbes to state her motion.
That the Board of Trustees approve the Indigenous education policy and accompanying procedures that are distributed as amended in our package tonight.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Trustee Brainy, your hand was up. Was that to second or to make a comment?
Chair Morton, it was to second it, but
no, go ahead, Chris.
Okay, I think Trustee Brainy's hand was up first. So seconded by Trustee Brainy. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, I'm looking for all those in favor, and I ask you to go to the reaction, indicate with your hand. I'm seeing 7 who are in favor. Are there any who are opposed?
Madam Chair, does this amendment require 3/4?
It is my understanding that we would need 6 votes. This motion is passed.
The majority, okay.
Thank you. Trustee Forbes, your hand is up? No? Trustee Crawford, your hand is taken down. Thank you kindly for that. And also thank you, Superintendent Elmhurst. That was a lot of work. We've done a great job on that. Thank you. Moving on to Associate Director David Wright, and we're going to talk a little bit about borrowing money. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I'd like to welcome Senior Finance Manager Melissa Durward to present the report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, tonight's report can be found on page 122 of the package. This is an annual report that comes forward each September seeking authorization from the trustees to authorize the signing officers of the board to borrow funds to a maximum amount to meet cash flow needs during the year. This year, again, we're asking for a maximum of $175 million. In the past school year, we used a maximum of $61.3 million of the 175 available. And the short-term financing is primarily used for capital needs, both the EDC deficit, as well as the capital projects carried out throughout the year while we await ministry reimbursement. The amount, as I said, is the same as the previous year, and we're seeking approval from the trustees. This is the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Melissa. I see Trustee Crawford with his hand up.
Just a simple one. What percentage and for how long?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, over the past year, the rate ranged from 1.16% to 1.23%. And what we do is we do 30-day bankers acceptance notes and adjust those each month according to any cash inflows and outflows during the month.
Thank you, Melissa. Are there any other questions? I have a question, Melissa, and that is in regards to the EDC funds. Are we continuing to advocate to the province for changes required to EDC protocol?
Yes, we are. And we also continue to work with our EDC consultant who has a great relationship with the ministry as well. And we continually keep the ministry updated about the situation and the deficit situation at our board.
Thank you for that. Seeing no other hands, I look at the recommendation and it reads, it is recommended that the attached borrowing resolution for the 21-22 school year be approved. Could I have somebody put forward that motion? Thank you, Trustee Templeton, seconded by Trustee Brainy. Further discussion? Trustee Brainy, do you have a question or a comment?
No, I just figured I'd leave my hand up, Chair Morton, just for the vote.
Okay, leave your hand up. All those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much for that report. Moving on, we have a few information items. The first one is the quarterly construction and major projects progress report. Back to Associate Director Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Lisa Bianca, Head of Facility Services, who will present the report this evening.
Thank you, Associate Director Wright, and through you, Chair Morton. I'd like to share with you this evening an update on the status of construction projects and major projects undertaken by the Ddsb up to August 31st, 2021. We currently have approval for 5 new school builds and 1 major addition. And we, as you saw earlier, we were very pleased to report that Rosemary Brown Public School in Ajax and Willows Walk PS in Whitby welcomed students and staff this past week to their state-of-the-art new buildings. We continue to work closely with the Ministry of Education to receive approvals to proceed to tender for the Beaverton Thora Central rebuild. We're expecting updated costing at the end of this week, and we are sincerely pushing this project along, as best we can. The 3 other projects, unnamed Pickering Creekwood, Mary Street Addition, and unnamed North Oshawa, are all proceeding through design development, and staff are working with the respective municipalities to gain site plan agreement approval so that we may move forward. Regarding major projects, we have a very wide range of initiatives that we have been undertaking the last year, including 47 capital projects that were funded by the COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream funding. That was the joint federal provincial funding that the board received. So we have put that to good use. And then just lastly, ventilation has continued to be a strong focus of our board, as it has for the last couple of years, including a number of CVERS funded projects, as well as projects that were funded by our own capital annual funding. That concludes my report, and I am very happy to take questions if there are any. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Lisa. Looking for hands with questions or comments, and I will go to Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. This is, and I know it's not on this report because it hasn't been approved by the ministry, but any news on a new high school for North Oshawa?
Thank you for your question, and through you, Chair Morton. That is one of our capital priorities that we submitted to the ministry in May this past year, and we are anxiously awaiting a response from them. So it's certainly our #1 priority. We've made every effort to reinforce with them that it is so, and hopefully we will hear something soon this fall. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you very much for advocating for the Thora Central Beaverton rebuild, and we continue to be hopeful there as well. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Moving on, we have Associate Director Wright, and he's going to talk about our draft accommodation plan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And once again, Lisa did such a great job with that last report. I'd like to ask her to stay for this next one, as well as Carrie Trombino, Manager of Planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Wright, and again through you, Chair Morton. I'm here this evening again to share the accommodation plan trends, issues, and future opportunities for the years 2021 to 2025. This report starts on page 133 of your package. This report provides information on growth within Durham, as well as how we will accommodate that, and a brief overview of how we have accommodated growth over the previous 5 years. We are experiencing growth in pockets within the district, but overall, our utilization rate hovers right around 100% and is expected to continue at that level. Within the report, you'll see that staff are proposing an investigation into some boundary review to address 2 issues. First and foremost, the French immersion accommodation within Ajax and Pickering French immersion schools, and as well at select secondary schools that have accommodation pressures primarily due to our inability to increase the number of portables on site to respond to accommodation pressures. So those schools are all identified in your report. That concludes my report, and I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Lisa. Questions for Carrie or Lisa or Associate Director Wright? I see Trustee Edwards with a hand. Trustee Edwards.
And I appreciate the report, and I love this report because it has all the data there. But the unfortunate part is sometimes it's not really well understood around the whole process of from our basically constituents. How a school is actually decided where it's to be built, and I know that we know that utilization rate is really key, and that if an area has some lower enrolled, which you had mentioned, we have some high utilized areas, but we also have areas of basically declining enrollment. And so I always get asked this question every year. So I just from a particular area of South Ajax and the Audley area is why and when there is going to be a new school built in that area. And I always ask the question almost every year is, what is the number of students that that is being bussed out of that particular area for regular school programs, recognizing that, again, the minimum size of the school that can be built is around 300.
Thank you for your question, and through you, Chair Morton. We have looked at sort of yields from high density development. I know there is some high density coming to that area. They have gone back, our planning staff have gone back and looked at yields from high density developments from 2013, 2019, and into 2020 and 2021. We have not seen an increase in the yield from high density developments in the Durham region that are ownership models like condominiums, etc. We do see a higher yield from residential rental units, but we're not seeing it yet from our condominium developments. That being said, we know it is a trend that we're seeing in Toronto and other more urban centers than we are right now. So it's definitely something we will continue to monitor in the Durham region year over year, because we fully expect that at some point it will come as we build out our municipality. I don't know if Carrie has anything to add to that other with regard to sort of the yields that we're seeing out of the Audley south, or the area that Trustee Edwards was referring to. I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Hi. No, I have nothing else to add in regards to the high density development. I think you covered that very well, Lisa. If there's an area specifically, Trustee Edwards, that you're referring to in the Audley area, we can definitely look into and get you that information that you're requesting.
And no, not particular. I mean, at this point in time, because I know residents are basically saying that it is the high density that's being built in there, and they're wondering, you know, why isn't it a school now being built? And if you look at our accommodations plan, there isn't really something in the near future, and that, you know, people are being bussed out to neighboring schools because Crothers is basically full. So and within that boundary. So but again, it's just that high yield that people have to recognize that we're not getting students coming out of that high density area. And the fact that we can't build a school if we don't have at least, as I said, it has to be actually at least 300 students actually there already. We can't count on additional site plans and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I was just wondering, they mentioned the boundaries adjustment and the for both the French immersion and a couple other schools. Is there a timeline for that? Are we thinking start and finish?
Thank you, Trustee Barnes, and through you, Chair Morton. Timing for the sort of a Pickering Ajax boundary review. We are looking at, we could start around January 2022, and it would extend throughout that year and into early 2023. The only concern, well, one of the concerns that we have is that our number for French immersion are in flux right now, and we think it's due to the pandemic. And we'd really want to really see what bears out before we make any hard decisions about changing boundaries and moving populations, only to find that children, students do return to the schools that maybe we were seeing a decline in. So that's something that we're going to look at very, very carefully. But certainly the very stressed schools, we need to look at immediately in that period.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Lisa and Carrie for joining us this evening. And to Superintendent Wright for providing us with this report. Awesome.
Thank you, Chair Morton.
Moving on, we have a report from SEAC. I will go back to Trustee Edwards for SEAC report.
I just lost my agenda. But anyways, the report for the SEAC, the May meeting of SEAC, it can be found, I think it's starting on page 223, and there's really nothing to add, and that's my report, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Donna. Are there any comments or questions regarding that report? Seeing none, I will move on to the OPSPA report, and I will go to Trustee Barnes. Patrice?
There's an OPSPA meeting this weekend, and that's my report.
Comments or questions regarding the OPSPA meeting, which will be held this weekend? Thank you, Patrice. Moving on, we are looking at correspondence, and I draw your attention to page 149. And that's the letter from the Toronto Youth Cabinet, Stephen Mensa. And I draw your attention to the 4th paragraph. And Stephen says, I would appreciate it if the DDSB could send a letter to the Minister of Education. At the core of the letter, the significant thing that needs to be on it is asking for the province to fully fund free menstrual products Ontario-wide. I'm asking for your input, your feedback to that request. Trustee Stone?
Yes, thank you. And through you, Chair. First of all, we don't know the cost of this. I'm wondering why we're asking taxpayers to pay for all women's menstrual products in schools when some obviously can afford it. As soon as somebody can't afford it, then we're paying for everybody. It doesn't seem right. Maybe we can think outside the box and maybe provide them in a different way. We're waiting for a report to come forward with our board with the trial that we're doing right now. So I'd rather wait for that report to come forward before we send any further letters, any letters to the ministry. I think, as far as I know, 25 cents was the cost for a menstrual product in schools. I don't know how that's maybe prohibitive for some girls. I don't know, but as I said, maybe we can figure out a way to get those menstrual products to the girls, to the women who can't afford it, rather than just right across the board pay for everything. It's a huge cost. It goes on to a taxpayer. So I think we need to think about that before we send this letter. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Trustee Stone. Moving on to Trustee Forbes.
Well, I think it's really an equity issue. It speaks to the socioeconomic diversity. It speaks to reduction of shaming around menstruation. In some countries, there are free menstrual products for everyone. This is a human rights issue, in my mind. I actually would like to see us take a stand. I know we referred it, but I think it's a good idea to be proactive and to really fight for female students. So I'll make that motion that we, as the DDSB board, write a letter outlining why free menstrual products we feel is a good idea Ontario-wide, and providing equity across the province to all students, not just so it's a board by board decision where we have proactive kind of forward-thinking boards that might be taking this on, and others that either financially can't afford it or are unwilling to do so. So, Chair Morton, I'd like to make that motion now.
We have a motion on the floor put forward by Trustee Forbes. We need to have somebody second that motion. Trustee Templeton, thank you, Scott. Discussion. I see Paul Crawford with his hand up. Trustee Crawford.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'd like to have more information on this. Again, as Trustee Stone mentioned, this is quite an expense, and we're just asking the government to spend the money on this when maybe there's other things they need to spend money on. I wonder if we could maybe treat this as a notice of motion so that we would have months to digest it and make the decision at the next board. And if we don't want to treat it as a notice of motion, then I move that we postpone it to the next board meeting for a decision.
David Wright has his hand up, so I'm going to ask Associate Director Wright to provide us with his opinion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Respectfully, not an opinion, but if I may, I do believe trustees passed a motion in the spring last year providing free menstrual products to all DDSB schools. We did indicate that it may take some time to roll out, that we were going to swap out coin machines for free dispensers and install new dispensers and provide menstrual products free of charge. We did indicate at the time that we didn't have a good handle on what the costs were going to be, because historically we didn't have a significant amount of usage or take-up. But we have now swapped out all of the coin vending machines for free dispensers, and we have installed dispensers at all of our schools. And so over time, we will be able to report back on the cost. We didn't add any additional expense in the budget line because, again, historically the cost was so low. But just wanted to make everybody aware that this is currently being done and offered in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Forbes, your hand is up again.
Well, since this would, this is an advocacy motion. This is about lobbying for all students across this province and equitable treatment for all people who menstruate in our schools. I really would like to make the motion now. And it costs the, it doesn't affect our budget, and it is really putting the onus on the government of Ontario to really find an equitable solution to this. And I would like to make this motion now.
Thank you. We do have your motion on the floor, and it was seconded by Trustee Templeton. I am going to ask Director Marsh for her input.
Thank you, through you, Chair Morton. I'm not sure if I have specific input in terms of the decision, but I think what Associate Director Wright brought forward is pertinent in terms of trustees, is that we taxpayers are currently in the Durham District School Board paying for the cost of making sure that there's equitable access to products. It was quite a compelling presentation that students made to the Board of Trustees. We did then go away and provide a more fulsome report to trustees about the implementation, and you did support that going forward. So I think, having said that, then if there's advocacy in terms of specific funding for this initiative, it would certainly assist the Durham trustees with budget management. However, we're not sure in terms of what the actual costs will be as we move forward with the implementation of it this year. It will be the first full year. I would also say that a number of districts across the province have taken a similar, or a number of boards have taken a similar stance to Durham's in terms of understanding, all of the arguments that the students made at the time to the Board of Trustees in terms of the importance of this initiative. Unfortunately, there are some boards that haven't been able to do it, and perhaps it is because of flexibility. So it may benefit students across the province should this be put in place. But understand that this letter is coming to you tonight, and I just wanted to provide that perspective in terms of what we're doing here locally and our budget.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Trustee Crawford, your hand is up.
Well, my hand's been up because I did make a motion to postpone this, and it sounds like some of the discussion that would be a wise thing to do. This is coming at us from nowhere, so to speak, and I'm not opposed to people making motions during a meeting, but I think this one requires a little more thought. So I'd like to consider postponing it until next board.
Trustee Crawford has put forward a motion that we postpone this decision for 1 month until the October board meeting. Do we have somebody who would second that motion? I see no hands up, so that motion has failed.
Oh, no, sorry.
Linda Stone, Linda was
Oh.
waving her hand, so.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, she's got to use her yellow hand, Carolyn, to be fair to you. So
Yep.
sorry, Linda, got to use your yellow hand or your hand. Sorry.
Trustee Stone, you are seconding that motion?
Yes.
So we do have a motion to postpone for 1 month. It was made by Trustee Crawford, seconded by Trustee Stone. Further comments? Then we will vote on that motion. I would ask that you use your hand under the reactions. Those of you who are in favor of postponing, please indicate. Thank you. I am only seeing 3 hands supporting that motion, so that motion has failed. We're going to go back to the original motion, and that was Trustee Forbes, seconded by Trustee Templeton. Trustee Forbes, could I ask you again to provide that motion to us?
That the Board of Trustees write a letter advocating for fully funded premenstrual products, citing many of the reasons that we passed the motion in our own school board to advocate for equitable access to menstrual products for all students in Ontario.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, then I ask you again, if you are supporting that motion, to please indicate with your hand under reaction. I am only seeing 4 hands. Maybe I'm seeing 5. That is still not a majority. I'm sorry, I'm still only seeing 5. So that motion, maybe 5. I'm correct. Then that motion also fails. Thank you for that discussion. There is more correspondence, and I draw your attention to pages 150 through 161 through further correspondence for your reading pleasure. Is there other business? Then I say to you, good night. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your engagement.
Good night, everyone. See you.